Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio. You are about to join a frequency that will open your mind, expand your heart, and activate your spirit. Thank you for joining Kelly Meehan, Spirit Baby Medium and Master Energy Therapist. Kelly believes in the power of the Spirit Baby. She speaks with babies in spirit before life, in the womb, and after life. She supports, teaches, and guides others to tune into the intuitive and mystical parts of life for greater wisdom. Join her in meeting your soul baby and build your connection and relationship with deep love and trust. Welcome to Spirit Baby Radio with your host, Spirit Baby Medium, Kelly.
Welcome to episode 93, July 31st, 2020. Spiritual sexual anatomy, cervix awareness, and healing pregnancy release. How can understanding your sexual anatomy offer body awareness? What healing does the uterus request within fertility and birth loss? What practical and holistic methods can support the journey? I have a special guest. Her name is Samantha Zipporah. She is a practical and radical medicine woman. She is an editor, author, and activist who inspires individuals to claim their power through body literacy and sovereignty. Sam provides vital education for everyone from professionals to preteens with a focus on fertility, sex, and cycles. Her approach is grounded in a solid understanding of biochemistry and biology and nourished by a gift for levity and intuitive spirituality. Sam offers guidance and education to folks all over the world, way of video chat, e-books, and online courses. She also teaches live classes and retreats. Thank you, Sam, for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation and holding the space.
Yeah, and I always like to go, like, where do I meet people? And I'm like, it's like I'm racking my brain. It's like I know I've connected with Sam's work a long time ago when I feel like it was within the birth loss energy more specifically. And and then I saw this thing on Facebook pop up that was like mapping the universe. I was like, what is this? I need to see this. I need to have this. And it's a anatomy coloring book, and I definitely want to hear more about that. I definitely want to hear more about that because
start there because that's actually I created that coloring book as sort of an attempt to have a 101 entry level, like pretty much any work that I would be doing with a client or any course that I would be teaching somebody, the information that is in Mapping the Universe coloring book is what I consider to be foundational for being able to learn and process and heal on these other levels more in depth. So it's really about creating that really practical, tangible, accessible foundation of understanding our physiology, which has been really, I think, one of the real gifts that I bring to this field is a very, very clear and inquisitive understanding of our physiology with the ability to hold space for deep spiritual, mystical experiences and questions, but really always wanting to anchor it with this clarity about what is physically true about the situation that we are in right now. And let's make sure that we are not like projecting mystical things onto the physical reality so that we have this like foundation of health and clarity on that level, in that dimension, which so few of us are given, in our youth or young adulthood or even postpartum after having babies. So mapping the young, it's a coloring book. It's fun. And I made it a coloring book because I wanted it to be for all ages and really hopeful that it would engage different styles of learning because I tend to be a very verbal person. So having something visual and, that somatic experience of coloring to offer people information about how the body works.
And I love that because I'm like a very visual person. So that's why I was like, you're saying you're very, auditory, which that's like my weaker point, but like the visual, kinesthetic, but I love the visual. There's something about, I was just saying earlier to Sam, I was like, it is very practical. It's really nice because I'm not being inundated with so much information that I'm just like, I don't know what's happening. And that's really nice. And then at the end, it goes into these kind of spiritual areas, just, a piece of it and going, oh, how does that? It's kind of like body, really a true body, mind and spirit connection. And even there's something I circled here on one of the pages. And it's true what you're saying, too, is like, different times of our life. Like, I feel like I'm 45 and I've had birthed 2 children. And I'm going, where is my sex education at 45? I actually feel like I need it, to be honest.
Yes.
Because I feel like my body's, can you speak about that? Is that like is other people say that?
Yes. I mean, you're a unique individual, you're a magical snowflake, and you're pretty normal. You're pretty normal in that you may or may not have known about all the glands that are listed in the Mapping the Universe coloring book. You may or may not have known that there's that strip of connective tissue from the top of your uterus that connects to the top of your vulva and contracts when you're fully sexually aroused. And, it's not a coincidence or an accident that so many of us are ignorant of our anatomy. And it's inherent power. Right? I mean, this is one of the ways that we could completely subvert the dominant paradigm of patriarchy and capitalism through self-awareness. And the systems in place are there for a reason. And so it's my joy to bring play, right, through the coloring book and through the way that I approach these conversations. To try and help people move out of shame and stigma and fear, which are very normal in our culture. And I've attended many different pregnancy releases, many births, miscarriages, and abortions. And most of the people who I've supported through pregnancy release are learning about their anatomy in depth, really for the first time during that pregnancy experience and postpartum. And that's actually a big part of my vision and dream moving forward. It's going to take me a handful of years to pivot because I have so many projects and things I'm working on for adults, but my real vision for my future is moving into youth education and trying to offer more of this foundation for young people before they start cycling, before they become sexual, so they don't make it to 45 and start learning about the internal clitoris, start learning about the 3 different layers of their uterus. So,
and I'm sure you must hear so many stories of women, and like you said, we are coming into this different time. It's like, I just recently learned, like you said, about the clitoris, and all it's like, it's not just this little thing, it's like this whole thing, and I'm like, what? What is this? And, I was one of those people, and, when I was a kid, the sex education was from the teacher, which was not a really positive thing. It was very it didn't really, my mom had a lot of problems with mental illness, sexual abuse, so she was telling me how terribly scary to be sexual was, and I was quite scared at 15 years old, which I know was very unnatural. And it really kind of molded a lot of my relationships and connections. I was one of those people, and I'm going to say it here, like in the podcast, I didn't know where my vagina was at 16 years old. Like, I didn't know where the hole entered the. I didn't know, and it's like, I'm trying not to get embarrassed right now, but I didn't. Like, I just didn't understand it, to be honest, and which makes sense why I always say that my first birth of my child broke my second chakra open.
Yeah.
Because it literally felt like physically, emotionally, and spiritually, and it now in my 40s has allowed me to look at the sensuality, the sexuality, that I'm allowed to be an empowered woman and I have boys, so I was like, I could bring this to my daughters. Well, I'll bring it to my sons on how to respect and connect with the woman. And even like you're saying, like I would love to, I'm still trying to figure out when to have the deeper conversation about the body with my 9-year-old, because there's a lot of hints around a lot of stuff. And so I'm going, where's that right piece and how do you do it?
Share the coloring book with him.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's why I made it. And it's like,
I love
even
that.
if they have that body part, whether, even if they're not going to be sexual with someone with that body part moving forward, even if they're not heterosexual relationship bound, it's still where they came from.
Oh, I love this. You give me chills on my legs. I love this.
Well, it's like just the most literal origin story that we all deserve to be told. Yeah. I
know. I could talk hours about that. And I would love to kind of shift over into this other piece of your skills and natural talents, I would say. I feel like there's always a calling for any type of work, that there's something deeper on a soul level. And the holistic healing after abortion and miscarriage, I have not got those books yet, but I did actually send one of my clients to the miscarriage resource, which has been really helpful for her when she was in the middle of it. And we were emailing back and forth, because women still, I would say a majority of women I see weekly, at least one or two have had a miscarriage. Like it's very rare that I don't see that that's a part of the fertility journey, whether they're in pregnancy, whether they're going through IVF. And so I want you to hear kind of what do those books provide to give people an idea. And the abortion pieces, that's another one that's just so big and needs so much love.
Yeah. So both of those books walk through mind, body, and spirit, and they introduce you to those categories by saying, hey, the division between these categories is a complete illusion. They're all intertwined, but this was a convenient way for me to organize the information here. And so there are journal prompts and methods of inquiry and ways of shifting perspective, as well as some flower essences and homeopathics in the mind section, and ways of looking at emotional health. And then the body is definitely the most robust offering in there, and it is herbs and nutrition and different styles of body work and different healing modalities that can be supportive, perhaps different styles of practitioners and pathways to healing than people have been exposed to before, and how they can be specifically supportive for the womb and nourishing after any kind of pregnancy release. And then the spirit walks through, just a little bit of my personal philosophy, as well as a myriad of cross-cultural rituals. So with an encouragement for people to seek out rituals from their own blood lineage, first and foremost, and to, of course, enjoy inspiration and acknowledge lineage if they are inspired and feeling really resonant by a ritual that is not from their own blood lineage. But just really looking at, in an anthropological perspective, looking at the reality that there have been rituals and ceremonies for holding space for this specific kind of grief, and holding space for being witnessed in community specifically, and not just individually when there is death, and when there is pregnancy release, and that these experiences are like at this matrix, right? This nexus of birth, sex, and death, all of these things that are profound rites of passage that deserve not just to be acknowledged by your beloveds and your intimate relationships, but in a healthy, intact culture, these are rites of passage that deserve witnessing and support from a community.
And I appreciate what you're saying, because I know from that death perspective and that grief perspective is the communal piece is always the missing piece, especially in America, and the death phobia that we all that's a whole other podcast, and many people hear me speak about that. But really, I love how you're able to, bring all these different pieces together, and even the ritual ceremony. There's a lot of lost energy in my lineage, I feel like, and there's a lot of ritual I'm having to create just through my own experience in this world, building an altar and, experimenting with what that looks like. And I always tell people to, just creating a ritual is very powerful, even if it's not just alone, but also I've heard women who I've supported through miscarriage have done different rituals, some women are, I want to say fortunate, and I know that could be taken wrong, but fortunate enough to pass their own, and have the fetus, the baby in their hands and able to actually do a ritual that's what, burying with a tree or doing something with that, was a possibility. And so I say that with the utmost delicateness, because I know that, some people are very scared of that, or maybe they feel like they've missed that. But what I've known and women that I've connected with that were able to be fully present for it, which was super intense and overwhelming. And it sounds like you're with a lot of women, maybe you're holding space for that kind of connection in their body. And then, and because most women are alone, right? Would you say most women are alone in those times?
I would say that, unfortunately, the vast majority are alone, and I think that there's just ignorance in that isolation, that one, they're worthy of witnessing and care, and two, that there is a growing population of people who are able to stand up and say, hi, I'm here to hold space for you. And that the same people who are holding space for birth and fertility journeys, all of these holistic modalities, many of them are willing and don't yet have experience or training, because there is such a taboo around death in our culture that it literally has affected the education that is available to healers and people in the caring professions. But like moving out of isolation for sure is a huge goal for the cultural shift that I'm hoping to inspire, and that, you and I are having this conversation. And that's part of that shift, is just like, we have to talk about it. About half of pregnancies do not end in birth. And all of those are rites and passages and are divine alchemy that deserve dialogue and witnessing and need integration and support. And so I guess if I just mention that, so the little books that your client ordered, there are physical books available and there are ebooks, but those were like the little seed for what has grown into a whole e-course that is geared towards care providers. But really, any kind of community activist or advocate who wants to hold space, the course would be appropriate for. And that course it takes like the little seeds from the books and just nourishes them and expands on them in a really, really robust way, to help people have a really diverse toolkit for caring for mind, body, and spirit, and 10 different types of methods and procedures of pregnancy release are covered in that course. And I know that you did mention abortion earlier, and I just want to say that central to my philosophy and the care that I provide and the writing that I do and the teaching that I do is that only the individual releasing the pregnancy, that is the only person who gets to decide how they feel about the end of their pregnancy. And as care providers, we have to be sitting in a question of how do you feel? We don't get to make assumptions, and we have to do our very best to pull back our biases and examine those biases And that physiologically, there's a lot of similarities. There's more the same than different when we're talking about miscarriage and abortion in terms of what is actually physically true, which circles back to what I was talking about earlier, that having this foundation of asking and being able to define what is physically true about this situation as a prerequisite for doing the deep spiritual journey as a care provider, right? As people in these experiences, they deserve to just be held. But as care providers in particular, I'm passionate that we need to have clarity about what is physically true so that we can effectively address any pain that might be happening and prevent any suffering, which I passionately believe that these experiences do not have to involve suffering if we have adequate education and support. There might be some pain involved, but suffering is not necessarily part of this process.
We definitely, everything you're saying, I'm like, woo, like glowing right now, going, oh my gosh, we need everything that she's saying and teaching, like everywhere, because it's so true. It's so true, because I'm just kind of reflecting back when I started the Abortion for Heart Healing group based on a friend. We started this group, and we're both not very active in it. The admins have taken over, and it's beautiful. It's up to 6,000 people, and they're around the world. Wow. And so I had to step away. It's literally its own thing, and I just let the admins are beautifully taking control of it. But there is a lot of judgment. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of people always trying to get in and just not knowing what to do, not being accepted, not being loved. And like I really heard you say was putting it like the feeling of the person and their experience. It's really not about whatever our things are, whatever that looks like. And it does take a certain level, I feel like, of a conscious person to really be able to sit with someone and say, hey, yeah, I love you no matter what. This is your experience. Yeah, let's say you had, multiple abortions, or there's like levels of trauma. It's none of my business almost to judge you. But what do you need? Let's see what has to be cultivated underneath to then hold you and then let you kind of move. But that does take, I love that you're working with the practitioners, because there was I peek into the birth world. Like I call myself a birth advocate because I'm very much into birthing, what feels right. And so I've seen the full, I love this full spectrum doulas, because I'm like, to me, there's a more open-mindedness in that space. But some doulas are like, no, anti-abortion. And I'm like, God, I guess that can exist, but it's very confusing when you're talking about what you said. It's like birth and death and all these pieces, they're all kind of like belong together, really. You can't learn one without the other. And it's the whole death thing. Like I have taken students now for more of the psychological but spiritual psychic space, and some of them that really want to expand as a fertility coach, a fertility specialist, I go, you're going to have to look at the death piece. The birth loss, the miscarriage, the stillbirth, and they're scared. I'm not going to lie, across the board. They're very nervous, and I'm like, but this is where you do your inner work to get there, and it's not going to be easy. It's like I said, where we have in our, in our wombs, we have life, but we also have death inside us, and I'll go there. I'll take people there depending on where they are. But I want to, one of this quote you said here, I loved it in the book, was I love how you said our uteruses are meant to hold and release pregnancy. Or no, that was not in your book. That was in your video on your website. Yeah. And I looked at that. I really just sat with that. That's meant to hold and release pregnancy. It felt like what an intelligent uterus.
Yes, this is what we're built for. This is what we're built for. And I feel like we suffer in our culture. I feel like there is more suffering with miscarriage and abortion, both because of, again, capitalism and patriarchy and this production-oriented value system. And that the reality is that our uteruses do way more bleeding than birthing in our lifetime. Mm-hmm. And that to have a pregnancy that turns into a child when it's desired, right, is a spectacular, beautiful thing, and nobody is entitled to that. And it's perfectly physiologically normal to try and fail to have a child. That there doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong. Like that is the vast majority statistically of miscarriages happen because of genetic abnormalities. And it's just nature trying and being like, no, this one's not the right one. This isn't right. This is not the viable one. And that we would all, I think there would be a lot less suffering if we didn't have this sense of both entitlement and expectation that a pregnancy means that we're having a child, rather than a pregnancy means that our body is going through an experiment. and I know, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes me think about, when I'm working with women and I tell them, I said, and I don't share this with a lot of women, but sometimes it comes up, especially if I'm working with consistently with their emotional, spiritual space of welcoming this being. And it's like, well, why don't they want to come here? And because I talk to the babies, but I was like, sometimes they don't have those answers the way that we think we should get them. Like you talk about when I see genetic stuff, I call an energetic lineage. And then I actually have seen that, and I've heard that, like, it's just, this is not the right vessel. And now what do we do with that? And what I like to go into is, so how does this feel? Like, what does this mean? And not mean to the sense you have to freaking overanalyze, because that's what people do. Like, it's like, how do you just be with your body now and nourish it and and especially with miscarriage and abortion, a lot of women, I realize, they try to not grieve. And I'm like, grief is natural. It's, you can probably speak to that too. Like, it has to be there. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to like sweep it under the wherever. And then you're suffering even more. It's, again, that permission to be sad over that loss, to have feelings around it. I've had women, actually a few women that I don't work with that. Like, some women I see with infertility, they have had abortion history, and some of it's just history. I feel like I don't, like, oh, is this why? And I'm like, that's history. Do we really have to activate that, to be honest? And then some people, to me, it's, I've had probably women say, I'm going to, have an abortion. Okay, that's your choice. And let's see what this looks like. And then they'll come back and go, I just one particular, I don't feel, I feel horrible afterwards. I'm like, I actually didn't say you were going to feel really happy and great about it, even though it was either a medical issue or it was a choice where it wasn't going to work. And it was so interesting, just that interpretation of it to go. And I said, what I look at as, I call it a postpartum death. It's a sudden death in your body and with your heart and all this. There's so many different elements in there. And, a lot of women, maybe you see that with abortion, especially, they're like, oh, I didn't know it was going to feel this bad after. And I'm like, there's a lot of things. Yeah, it's like a very common thing I hear, even in the group. But it's like, just because you feel that way doesn't mean it was a wrong thing. That's the piece I feel like.
Bless you. That is 100%. Yes. And just, that this goes into this, like the false dichotomies of our mind, body, and spirit, and the reality that we can be clear mentally on a choice, being the right choice for us, and still have emotional and spiritual experiences that are unpleasant within that. And that, it's all valid. There doesn't need to be this black and white, yes, no. It's really almost always yes and.
Yeah. It reminds me of when women say, also, I always say after the miscarriage, or if they're in the middle of it, and there's a lot of anxiety, I notice with women, and I'm like, okay, well, once things are, moving to the next level, and that'll shift and change, and then it's like being with the grief for a little bit, seeing where it wants to go, or seeing if it needs to be bigger or smaller or whatever it is, and creating that ritual, that space, and then, I just feel like then there's some point of regrouping the energy and like, okay, looking at things, and then kind of really being present with it, which is so hard, right? It's like, I'm not going to be present. I'm going to think about this, or I have to have some mental plan, right? This is where a lot of women, a lot of people, it's like, where's the mental plan for the next
need a roof.
Like,
we need a marker of like, this is the container. And that's why I love the 40 days. I love 40 days postpartum, 40 days of very special foods, special rituals, maybe even a special garment or piece of jewelry, and a really big shift in what you and others in your life are expecting from you for that 40-day period, no matter what kind of pregnancy release it is. And that, again, I just
what a loving thing. I know, what a loving thing. Yeah. So loving. What is wrong with us women? No, well, it comes back to the not to blame. I'm not going to blame anybody, but we knew how, like you talked about the patriarchy in this system and how it is. And I feel like sometimes you feel this way. My arms need to be so long because I just want to hug all these women, that feel disconnected or suffering, and it's like,
there's nothing wrong.
You're okay. There's nothing. It's okay. It's okay. Like I tell women, like when they're looking for infertility and they're on a long journey and they're using, maybe some women will get abusive with technology, and it's like okay. And I'm sure you've seen that as well. And then it's like, where's the let's stop it and calm down and kind of assess like what is happening here. And
I really love the tool of inner child work for folks that are struggling to conceive or struggling with miscarriage. I mean, really, I think everybody needs to do inner child work.
I know. Really, my inner child's still peeking up.
It's really universal. But specifically, if you are trying to welcome a child into your body and into your home, I think that it is imperative that you welcome the child that is already there, right? And we need to be able to respond to our own nonverbal cues, right? Like the nonverbal cues of an infant when it needs to be swaddled, when it needs a nap, when it needs to be fed. We need to be able to be present and non-judgmental. We need to be able to react to those nonverbal cues and nuances inside of our own beings with the tenderness, with the mothering that we would give to an infant. And I think that that's a vibrational gift that we need to be able to give ourselves as a healthy prerequisite for offering space to a whole other being to be there, is this attitude about those basic needs, that if we're shaming ourselves or denying ourselves and our inner child these needs for naps and snacks and cuddles and all these things, and we're trying to just like power through and be functional and productive, that we're not creating a space that feels nurturing or spacious for somebody who has those needs and is not able to be productive and functional to show up and share space with us.
And I tell women when they're on this fertility journey, and whether they're natural or using some technological support, it's, it doesn't always have to be positive. Like, women are surprised, like, well, maybe I'm grieving. And I go, well, you can actually grieve and still conceive. There's a term, grieve. But my point is that not every moon and star and the world has to be aligned. You don't have to have the perfect house. Like, it's so much more than that. And there's always a level of mystery, I tell women. It's like, there's a lot of unknown pieces. Like, I know when I was open to receive my sons, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of half terrified. Like, first of all, I discovered that I had some type of phobia around birthing, physical birth, and so there's a lot of that, which I heard there's a term for, which was very telling because my first birth it was deeply traumatizing, and I had postpartum depression, which actually made sense. So I must have had my terrors were probably on the mark. And with my second, who was so present, so loud, and such an amazing birth, which was years of preparing for his arrival, I was like, I'm bowing down to this being to come to me. It's not about me going, well, you need to come because I want to create a family. It was more of like, I'm here and I'm going to let go into this very scary place inside me that says I may or may not be a mother in this way. I don't know. And to be open to that, to not, like asking the questions, being curious, exploring the many different pieces, I feel like, of ourselves. And like you said, I call it the inner infant. Some of my lady friends and my sisters I hang out with and Zooming these days, I say, let's talk about our inner infant. It's like, what is Kelly going to?
Yes.
It's not the inner child. Let's go back even further. What is this inner infant and what did she not get? Like, whether conscious or not, parents can be neglectful. Like, the neglect literally could be, oh, you went to the NICU, or, oh, I wasn't held right away. Or, I mean, it's not even intentional. It's not even intentional neglect a lot. And people are like, oh, I never really thought, or adoption, or it's like people don't think about that. It's like, oh, you have these things and these feelings, but nobody ever wants to go. And birth psychology, of course, covers a lot of that kind of pre-birth connection with ourselves, and it's quite fascinating. I mean, I feel like there's so much to learn about that part of us, and how welcoming it is, even on the fertility journey for some women. You know, when a woman comes to me, and I don't know if women come to you with infertility diagnosis, whether known or unknown, and they tell me it's been 10 years, and I'm looking at them, really, 10 years? Like, okay, what's happening? Like, this is really deep, that you've been, quote unquote, trying, whatever, you know, and I don't know, like, that 10 years is a very big backstory. And then I'm going, in our one session, I'm going, we'll do it the best I can in this moment. To see, like, what's the bigger, and there's some people I worked consistently, but some people come and they're like, you know, they want me to give them a miracle, and it doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, again, back to the physiology, I'm just like, are you eating and sleeping well? Because if you're not eating and sleeping well, that's the place to start. And I'm always just really destroyed by how many people come to me who are not eating and sleeping well, who are on in vitro and beating themselves up and curious and concerned on all these levels, where I'm like, you've got to get the foundation right. Like, I've joked about writing a sleeping and pooping guide to fertility.
I love it.
Like, eating right means eating right. They're the same thing. You know,
it's true. I like that.
We're going to be having healthy, regular poops, which are so important for hormonal balance, that you be moving your bowels regularly and correctly. I don't need to go too far into poop talk, but again, like, yes, there are spiritual things. There are ancestral and mystical and magical things that are affecting our fertility. And let's get really, really down to basics before we start taking pills, having injections, having procedures, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let's start with, you have the proper omega fats to ovulate. Are you sleeping consistently and regularly enough in the dark so that you might ovulate? And that these are just, you know, it's functional medicine, traditional styles of medicine. And Chinese medicine and Taoism are some of my absolute favorites for any kind of fertility and womb and blood conversations. I don't have any formal education, but I've just been self-studying and reading and getting acupuncture myself and talking to my practitioners and friends who are practitioners forever. And that's my definite number one recommendation for anybody who's really struggling with infertility and repeat miscarriages, to get to a Chinese medicine doctor, acupuncturist. They have such a
I completely agree on that one, because a lot of the women I do see that are on the IVF journey, and if they're when they get that Chinese medicine perspective, and whether they're on herbs and they're doing it, it does make a huge difference. I've seen women go for, like, you know, and sometimes it takes time. I think there's such a rush, right? We're in such a quick culture. Like, the baby should have been here yesterday. But it's like, now your body's been, like, living one way for so long. And now it needs time to kind of go through cycles, right? That's what we say, cycles, literally, to kind of transform itself, and then to see. And, you know, I tell women intuition to me is really important. I'm like, you got to listen to even with IVF, that's my number one thing with IVF. When women come to me, and I do have a few women I work with consistently, it's like, what is your intuition saying the most? Because maybe that progesterone is too much. Maybe that estrogen that you're pumping in is not working. Why is it not working? What are you not listening to? And don't be scared to say, you know what? this doesn't feel right or something is off. And I see that. I've seen women like piss off their ovaries and they don't create follicles. But I'm like, yeah, you've upset it. You've upset it. You've created so much force. And then they get scared. And then these few women I'm thinking about, there's like just go into super de-stressing and calm. So they have to like go into that place. And then it comes back. But it's the embodiment, and I know you spoke about that, is, knowing our bodies, like even all of our body parts, and just feeling, sensing into it. It doesn't even have to be more than that, because people will say, oh, well, I didn't know I had polyps, or I didn't know I had a fibroid. And you may not feel that. That's okay. Like, there may be a different energy around that you're not so attuned in. It doesn't mean you don't know your body. It just means you're learning about yourself. I feel like when we start to get really judgmental, then we shut everything down. What's the point?
Yep. Yeah, I love, Taoism and Chinese medicine. It's the ovarian palace. Right?
I love that word.
The whole female reproductive system, like you put your thumbs on your belly button and you make a little diamond shape with your fingers, and everything your hands are touching is the ovarian palace. And it's recommended to spend about a year with very special nutrition and special rituals to call in your child before you try to start conceiving, before you even introduce the sperm to the situation. You spend a year cultivating your ovarian palace,
I love that.
carrying your ovarian palace.
I love that. I really, until you call into the sperm. It's true. It's so true what you're saying. And I feel like what happens with women when they get into their 40s, especially, all of a sudden they're like, oh, I want a child. And there's like high stress job. And then they're like, but some of them are single, and they're like, okay, let's make this happen. And then they start pushing up against like the control and the hurting of the body. And then it's like you said, it feels like there's more permission, but people get scared. And I tell people, it's or things are bad, but I said, actually, it's not that uncommon, and it really depends on the person, like you said, it depends on the lifestyle.
Yeah.
I had my children later, but I was on a 10-year journey of healing an autoimmune disorder. I didn't think I was going to have children because the autoimmune issue was my child, to be honest. I was like not moving anywhere with that, and then when the time came, I was like, I'm going to be open. And I said, I don't know if, before that I wasn't even going to gynecologists because I felt traumatized by those experiences. And then I was like, I'm just going to listen to my body, to be honest. And then 8 months later, I conceived my first son, and I was like, I was going to give myself a year or two and see if this thing worked or not. Like, I don't, look at me, I don't know much about my body at that time. And so I was like, let's see what happens. But I felt like my 10 years after I was diagnosed with the sickness, I took a credit card out and went holistic because insurance doesn't pay for all that. So I did like the acupuncture, the herbs, and it was painful. Like it was like my body was going through such a change, and it was like I had to sleep a lot. I had to like not work, I had to like go into this cocoon of like, but I felt like that was like my time of detoxing my body of so much junk. And then when I did show up to go, oh, I'm ready to receive this being into my world, it came 8 months later. And then it actually felt like with my recent son, and now he's going to be 4. It felt like, I know, it's crazy. He looks like a little baby. He came very quickly and easily and effortlessly at 40 years old, birthed him at 41. And I'm going, this is not what people say it is. They're saying when it's older, you're this risk and this. And I have worked with midwives. Midwives don't see you as a risk unless there's actually a risk. They don't see age, which I love. I'm like, there's no risk. And I was very fortunate to birth him in my living room. And so it was, a most intense but beautiful experience. It had everything wrapped into it, And I was like, wow, it's so interesting that the way he showed up. And I was kind of half invested if there was a second being that wanted to come into my world, because I had a lot of fear with the first, and so that really kind of, I did a lot of work in between, even the moments of giving birth to him, I was still doing the work. The tears were coming the whole pregnancy. Like, oh, there's a lot that wants to unravel and unwind and be, present for what the birth was going to bring. Again, of course, my phobic biggest fear, right?
Yeah.
Yet again, showing up. Why? It's like, you keep showing up to this, Kelly. What is that? You're like, and it just reminds me of a mom today, actually. I do a Afterlife of Spirit Baby monthly group now for the past year with these amazing women, and one of them is pregnant, and she said the most challenging thing in my life right now is getting ready to birth her baby, and she lost her son. It's like, whoa, it was like so, just so incredibly beautiful, and at the same time there was so much power in that heartache, It's like both parts yet again. It's like the trauma and the grief, and yet this life is here, and it's it just reminds me of birth is like that. Like women have to going through infertility, feeling that incredible loss and showing up. That's the thing. We're all still showing up for these intensity experiences.
Yeah, there's my midwifery teacher, Elizabeth Davis, who, when I studied with her, actually, I studied with her because I had read multiple books by her. I self-studied to be a midwife for a few years before I invested in sitting with a teacher, and it was her book on intuition. I think it's just called Intuition by Elizabeth Davis, that really inspired me to sit with her. And in the back, flap of the book, it was like, oh, she actually teaches classes. And I moved to the Bay Area to go study with her. And she went on to write Orgasmic Birth, which I don't know if you know that book, with Deborah Pascali, I think is the other author's name.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, super badass luminary midwife. I love her books and her work in general. But she would say, every time you touch a woman, you touch everything that has happened to her there. And that was, the day that we learned how to do pelvic exams.
Wow, yeah.
So she shared that in discussing the layers of trauma and pleasure and sexual experiences and ancestral and familial projections and seeds that are all in our pelvic bowl. There's so much there in that cauldron, and anytime you stir it up, you don't know what's going to come to the surface. So, yeah.
Well said. The cauldron, yes.
Absolutely.
I would love to, we're coming up to the end now, and I would love for you to share your website, any upcoming projects or trainings or things that you can, have people kind of join and be a part of.
Yeah, well, I have a Patreon account for folks that are not familiar with Patreon. It is a platform that is kind of similar to Facebook in the way that there's a news feed, but it's just mine. And I share class notes and blog posts and different pieces of works in progress, courses, and pieces of writing on that platform. And then once a month, I offer an Ask Me Anything webinar for everybody who is a member and a patron. And you can give anywhere from $1 a month to anything you would like to give, but different tiers have different benefits. So that's really my most active presence currently. I'm not seeing clients for the next handful of months. My miscarriage and abortion support e-course that is really the deep dive is available on my website, which is my name, Samantha Zipporah, ZIPPORAH.com, as well as the Mapping the Universe book is on there, and all kinds of other goodies. Also there's a whole video of me narrating the whole Mapping the Universe book available on my Patreon page, among a bunch of other goodies that are just on that platform. So yeah, my website, which is SamanthaZipporah.com, and then You can find my Patreon there through my website, or you can go to Patreon/Samantha Zipporah if you want to see what I'm offering on that platform. And yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity to share with your audience and to share some time with you as well. I'm really delighted that you are coloring the universe and I'm really hopeful that you do share it with your sons.
Well, thank you for that. I know now you've inspired me to. I didn't think of that, but I want to be a sexually responsible parent, not the way my parents did it. I want to keep my kids in the dark. I want to talk about emotions, feelings. Yeah.
Yes, you are it. You're doing it.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It was wonderful hearing all your wisdom and connecting, and I feel like there's so much more to discuss on this really valuable, important topic, and I love that you were able to share some of your presence here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining episode 93, Spiritual Sexual Anatomy, Cervix Awareness, and Healing Pregnancy Release. If you like my podcast, please subscribe, leave reviews. Thank you for joining Spirit Baby Radio. Please check out the book I have. It's a journal, Sacred Communication, a Spirit Baby journal, and soon to come out is Spirit Baby Oracle cards.
This is Spirit Baby Radio. Thank you for joining Kelly in the energy of awareness, love, healing, and soul communication. Please join the next episode at www.soulbabycommunication.com.